Do you know we have an office in Nairobi?
Yeah, I've been with your former colleagues before.
Mhm.
Yeah. What's name?
Okay, okay, yeah. Yeah, I worked with him in the past.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
And do you know Philip as well? Okay, he came from the African Union, and he now is I think one of the senior persons in Nairobi office.
You should be able to link up with them.
Exactly.
Yeah. Since Putney has left, I've not had any contact with Nairobi office.
It's with the personnel, the staffing is in flux.
Yes.
But the Philip is a good guy. I think he's going to be there for quite some time. When it's anything, I can email you.
You can
Exactly.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's it. There's nothing we can do about it. Sorry? You made it. You made it.
This is what Germany says. I think it's almost the same thing with what
It might be distracted.
Thank you.
I can actually tell you should we wait a few moments or should we just get started without time?
Can you introduce me also as CM?
Yes,
Because we didn't
I already put it in there.
I contacted the Canadian negotiator this morning again, letting him know the country's progress. It's also okay.
Yeah, and then you can maybe also make an intervention from the forum. Apparently there may be an EC person still joining us.
Wasn't there just now actually the negotiation enforcement?
Really, I wonder if we challenge there. So either Achala will be there and she will start, or she's not there, then you will start.
I will.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So.
It all makes sense. Right. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us for this morning's side event. My name is Harro van Asselt, and I'm a professor of climate law and policy at the University of Eastern Finland and a senior research fellow at the Stockholm Environment Institute. And I'll be moderating today's event. And welcome, Achana. The event is jointly organized by the University of Eastern Finland, by the University of Lapland, and also by the Caribbean Community Climate Change Center on behalf of the PACT consortium. And PACT stands for the Project for Advancing Climate Transparency, which is led by the World Resources Institute. So why are we here today? 1.5 years ago, when we were gathering in Paris, we could witness quite an important shift in the role of in the recognition of the role of non-party stakeholders or non-state actors in this very intergovernmental process. Decision 1, CP21, highlights and encourages the various contributions made by non-state actors and puts in place various processes to scale these actions up. However, much of the discussion around non-party stakeholders and the Paris Agreement has focused so far on encouraging these stakeholders' own actions. So we're talking about businesses committing to greening their operations. We're talking about subnational actors trying to take action in cities and municipalities. We're talking about financial sector issuing green bonds and so on. While such actions are no doubt important, they also represent only one part of what we think is the vital role of non-party stakeholders in making Paris work. Which brings us to today's event. We're coming now very close to a critical juncture in the negotiations on the Paris rulebook, in which parties will determine the operational rules for several key mechanisms of the Paris Agreement, including the communication and the accounting of NDCs, the enhanced transparency framework, the global stocktake, and the implementation and compliance mechanism. However, what we see is that there's a bit of a disconnect between the intent of parties to strengthen the engagement of non-party stakeholders on the one hand, but also the development of the rulebook on the other, with the positive role of non-party stakeholders in strengthening these mechanisms largely overlooked or underappreciated. So to give just one example, and you may have noticed this also in the ECO this morning, the APA workshop on transparency held here in Bonn a few months ago in March was not only close to observers, but also if you look at the 30-page summary report from the workshop, at no point does it mention any contribution or potential contribution of the role of non-party stakeholders in the transparency framework. Yet we know that non-party stakeholders can play a variety of key roles in operationalizing these mechanisms. And maybe one thing that a lot of people already are aware of is that non-party stakeholders can act as watchdogs. They can help in monitoring implementation and compliance, and they can name and shame specific parties for not acting as they promised. But at the same time, I think it's also important to realize that non-party stakeholders can play a variety of other roles. They can provide relevant information and expertise on where we are in terms of emission reductions, but also identify mitigation and adaptation options. They can not only name and shame laggards, but they can also name and fame climate leaders. and they can help identify and overcome key barriers to implementation, such as gaps in capacity, funding, or technical knowledge. Moreover, and this is again what Paris was highlighting, by taking actions themselves, subnational governments, companies, civil society, and so on, are also helping to drive up overall ambition. In other words, we believe it's high time to have a serious discussion on how non-party stakeholders' experiences and expertise can be integrated into the design of the Paris rulebook. So today we'll hear from our speakers on where the negotiations on the rulebook are headed, why it's crucial to engage non-party stakeholders in the development and implementation of the rulebook, and very importantly, how this actually can be done. But here I also want to make a comment that we're not the only relevant event on this topic today. So later on today, and I would very much encourage everyone to participate actively in that, there will be an in-session workshop organized under the auspices of the SBI on opportunities to further enhance the effective engagement of non-party stakeholders. And I think this provides another opportunity for especially non-party stakeholders who have very, very strong views on how their engagement can be strengthened to feed that into the intergovernmental discussions. If all goes well, we have either 5 or 6 speakers today. I think actually we have 6 speakers now, so which I'm very, very pleased with. So following the speakers, obviously there will be some time for questions and comments from the audience. We'll see how good my throwing skills are. But given what I've just said about the role of non-party stakeholders being underappreciated in party discussions, we're very pleased to have at least 2 party delegates with us today. And the first one is Achala Adesinger, who is making time in her very busy schedule to come here and give us an indication of her views on this topic. Achala is not only working for the International Institute for Environment and Development, but she's also legal and technical advisor for the LDC chair. And importantly, this is one of the groups that actually has highlighted the role of non-party stakeholders in various of their submissions. So Achala, as you have to leave for talks again soon, we're going to start with you this morning. So hopefully you can provide us some opening thoughts on the role of non-party stakeholders in the design of the rulebook. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and good morning, everybody. I just came from a meeting with a colleague who is representing society groups here, advising us on how to try to see how we can try to match support provided and support received in terms of financial support to developing countries, which is a extremely controversial topic, and we are struggling how to see that this is being done. And at 12 o'clock, I have to go to negotiations on compliance. So you see how things are getting complicated, and at the same time, we are getting support from colleagues who are here, not representing parties, but at the same time providing a very crucial support to negotiating groups like ours. I represent the least developed countries group, poorest in the world, 48 countries. And we get funding to attend these negotiations, 2 people funded by the UNFCCC, and mostly that's it. And our people at national level, their job description doesn't recognize engaging in UNFCCC negotiations and drafting rulebooks. They have different job descriptions at national level, and if they do have their multinational, multilateral engagement recognized, it's not only the UNFCCC. They are responsible for many multilateral treaties. So that's the situation we are in. And you come here, we have plethora of agenda items, parallel bodies meeting, and all very, very complicated. And I must say that LDC Group is one of the groups that push for the highest possible ambition in the Paris Agreement, particularly the ratcheting up mechanism, and also the need to recognize the 1.5 degree target as one of the long-term global goals in the Paris Agreement, and also need to have some kind of arrangement to put the 2 together. And that's where the rule book of the negotiations come in. Some people tell me, why are you still in this negotiating process? We now have the Paris Agreement, focus on implementation. which is wrong. Paris Agreement is just an empty shell without the rule book. So we have to get this right, and we have to set the same direction of travel in the Paris Agreement rule book as well. Otherwise, we are going to fail in achieving the 1.5 degree target, particularly that side, but also we have two other long-term goals in the Article 2 of the Paris Agreement. This week's negotiations, I think, as you all know, quite strongly overshadowed by potential US withdrawal, but also at the same time US withdrawal from the Paris Agreement, but at the same time still the procedural nature of how do we capture what's being negotiated here. What do we do to move beyond the conceptual negotiations to actually put things in kind of a decision text mindset and to take it forward. We have 8 weeks of negotiations left, 2 weeks here, 2 weeks in Bonn in November, and then possibly another 4 weeks next year to complete this whole thing. So all this to say, the importance of getting all parties, all stakeholders at all levels engaged in this process, and that involves engagement of non-party stakeholders, not only just negotiating process, but also at the implementation side, not only just planning, but also formulation and implementation of our NDCs and other activities that we are going to do, but as well as reporting side, and then taking it a step forward in terms of reviewing the activities that we have done. We have the global stocktake concept that we have to further elaborate in these rulebook negotiations, and that is going to focus on collective efforts by all parties. But one of the key roles that we hope that non-state parties can help us doing is to actually review the individual activities and give us some kind of picture where we are in terms of taking responsibility in terms of reducing emissions as well as supporting the developing countries. LGC Group made a submission on non-party stakeholder engagement in this process, as Harold mentioned, and we recognize, as I mentioned, 3 key areas. One is how we get the non-party stakeholders to engage in the negotiating process. You hear in the plenary discussions many parties mentioning that we have to open the sessions for civil society groups to engage, but we don't go beyond just saying that we need to open the sessions. We need to go beyond that and say how we want these the non-party stakeholders to engage in this process, and that takes us beyond just opening the sessions for non-party stakeholders, but also getting the expertise and expertise to engage in this process, both at formal as well as informal negotiations. And then in our submission, we also recognize the key role that non-party stakeholders or the civil society groups, as well as cities, private sector, etc., play in terms of implementing NDCs. And we have gone through all the INDCs as well as NDCs on the table to see how many INDCs and NDCs recognize the role that these stakeholders play, and therefore we recognize in the submission the need to get them to engage in the decision-making process at national level, as well as having them to be on board for implementation. We also talk about in the submission the role of non-parties in the review process. That's where we link this to the global stocktake discussion, and that there are a number of areas we recognize. One is expert reviewers engaging with non-party stakeholders during in-country visits as a way of gathering the necessary information, also getting them involved in both technical review and national reports, as well as in the multilateral consideration process, and inviting them to be to submit relevant information or contribute specific expertise in order to help parties tackle barriers to implementation, as Haro mentioned, and also providing insights and expertise in the assessment of progress towards implementation of the NDCs, as well as enhancing ambition. These are the key points that I wanted to highlight here, but also one final point around the capacity building initiative for transparency. One thing that LDC Group is pushing for is to recognize the extra needs of capacity building that will be needed for LDCs as well as small island developing states in terms of reporting and other aspects of the transparency framework. Another final point I was asked to make is the importance of the California summit, and that we as a group discussing how we can engage in that as countries, but also encouraging all stakeholders in our countries to effectively participate in that process. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Achala. Thanks again for coming, and also thanks for highlighting that we need to move beyond the rhetoric and identify options of how to strengthen the role of non-party actors or stakeholders in the various processes. So next we move on to Sebastian Dwick, who works at the University of Lapland, but also at the Center for International Environmental Law. And Sebastian will talk about why we need to start thinking about strengthening the role of non-party stakeholders, and also how we can draw on some experiences from other regimes. Sebastian.
Thank you, Haro, and thank you to the organizers for this very timely event. This is particularly important because we have this workshop this afternoon, and I think we'll come back to this later. And it's very encouraging to see so many people in the room. Before going into the details, I wanted to remind everyone of the importance of this specific 1.5 years still. There's a lot of talk about the importance of designing the rulebook, but I wanted to remind everyone of the importance of this specific time window. So we have another 18 months for the design of a rulebook, for conclusions on all of the AP agenda items. And what we expect afterwards is that we have this package of decisions that is adopted at the end of 2018. And those decisions will guide for literally decades to come how governments implement the Paris Agreement. I'm not trying to make it more dramatic than it sounds, but if we look back, in Marrakesh in 2001, we had the Marrakesh Accord, who explained how the Kyoto Protocol was going to be implemented. And those decisions were never revised in any very substantial manner. So that's why it's particularly important not to consider that we need to set other rules first and then perhaps come back to stakeholder engagement, the role of non-state actors, but really to make sure that we integrate this and we consider this potential, this opportunity to leverage the role of non-state actors with more urgency. And that's particularly important for the representatives of all constituencies to really make sure that this becomes part of a discussion more rapidly. And I wanted to highlight a few entry points in the APA discussion where there could be specific opportunities to strengthen the recognition of the role of non-state actors. It's not just about narrative, about highlighting that there is a right to public participation. There is one, but it's also very important to recognize what is the added value, why does it make sense, and where exactly specific roles could be further reinforced. By default in this intergovernmental process, the role of non-state actors is only enabled if it is explicitly mentioned in the decision. Otherwise, the default approach is that it is a party-driven process, so only parties are able to participate in particular processes. And we'll have a few examples where having failed to include references to non-state actors earlier means that right now we lack specific access, specific opportunities to provide input. And when I say we, it's very broad way. It means NGOs that have national expertise. It means research institutes that have data that could be extremely helpful. It means local governments that could also provide a different perspective on implementation at the national level. And this is particularly important because at the moment, we've already halfway through the negotiation of the Paris rulebook, and we've seen very, very little focus on what role non-state actors could be playing in various agenda items. It's important to have this decision because this role is differentiated. It is not going to be addressed through just an umbrella reference to the importance of non-state actors' engagement. It needs to be really integrated to specific modalities. And so one very specific argument that I would like to discuss with you is the role of non-state actor in the transparency framework. So we have to remember what is the transparency framework under the Paris Agreement here to achieve. We'll go in more detail afterwards, but just there is several objectives in it. One is to clearly enhance trust among parties and make sure that every government feel confident that their peers are taking climate action on the basis of what they had committed. There is an objective also to strengthen the capacity in some of the countries by forcing governments and other stakeholders to really engage with the data, to monitor actions that is being implemented, and then to better be able to assess where are potential gaps to be filled. And there is also, of course, an element to providing stronger incentive, both to make sure that countries do deliver on their NDCs, but also actually to provide incentives for countries to do more so that they can report that they have been championing action, that they went beyond the numbers they put on the table. And this is particularly important because, as we all know, there is a very strong discrepancy between the aggregate impact of NDCs and the well below 2 degrees and even 1.5 target mentioned in the Paris Agreement. So the way the transparency framework under the Cancun agreements function at the moment is that you have countries reporting on their commitments, and you have, for instance, developed countries providing biannual reports. There is a review, an expert review of these reports. That's a very energy-consuming and resource-intensive process to really make sure that this data is transparent. That's something that we can do with 40 countries, that we might not be able to do with 200 countries when we need to do the same type of review for every single party. And then there is a multilateral assessment through which parties can ask each other questions to better understand some of the numbers, perhaps to question also when there is a little bit of a gap in the data, but also to simply understand how a party has been able to deal with specific challenges in terms of implementation. And so this would be an extremely interesting opportunity both for national NGOs to be able to have a stronger engagement with their governments, just to be able to produce the reports together, or to ask the government afterwards some clarification on specific elements of the reporting, but also at the international level to add a little bit of incentive to the discussion of this report, so that a government maybe can stand and be even more proud of reporting a good success or some additional action that goes beyond previous engagement. Also, perhaps that NGOs can question when the ambition is not adequate or when there is a loophole in the reporting. And so this is very important because at the moment, under the Cancun framework, the multilateral assessment, there is no formal role recognized anywhere for non-state actors. It's a purely governmental process, so only parties can ask each other questions. There is no possibility for any research institution or national organization to be able to have a say in this process. This relates to the Cancun pledges, but we know that this Cancun transparency framework is going to serve as the basis for the future transparency framework under the Paris Agreement, the one we call enhanced transparency framework. So there is a very strong opportunity there to consider what kind of entry points there could be for research institutions with additional data to bring this to the table, but also for other stakeholders, maybe to question, to push governments a little bit, or to encourage them to take more ambitious action. And I think it's important to discuss this not in isolation, not thinking within the UNFCCC bubble, but to relate also to other intergovernmental experiences. And the challenge with the UNFCCC is often that this is such a heavy process that many of the negotiators and the stakeholders engaged here have maybe less experience of other processes because we have developed this UNFCCC focus expertise for many of us. But there are other international processes where transparency is also one of the main leverage to incentivize action or implementation, and where you see the recognition by a lot of states of a stronger role for non-state actors. And I wanted to speak about one in particular. It's the Universal Periodic Review of the Human Rights Council. There's a couple of things that is particularly interesting in relation to this review. The first one is that this process applies to every single party to the UNFCCC. So it is a universal process. Every party here has accepted to go every 4.5 years, more or less, under this universal periodic review. The second interesting element is that the universal periodic review is to review commitment by governments on every single of their human rights obligations. There are extremely controversial or politically contested discussions happening there about torture, about freedom of religion, about very hotly debated issues. It's a lot more politically charged than discussion about whether you have a loophole in your forest reporting. Yet, governments agree there that civil society should have a capacity to provide complementary information in addition to or before the national report is provided, also to make comments during the discussion of specific individual countries' reports, and it specifically also invite countries to prepare their national reports on the state of play of human rights respect domestically with their domestic stakeholders. So I think if every single party to the UNFCCC was able to agree to such a mechanism in the human rights context, it's very difficult to see how we should not learn when we develop an enhanced transparency framework from these other processes and acknowledge that you can have very constructive interaction with stakeholders. I'll be happy to move to other agenda items of the APA, but I will probably not do that in too much details now, but just in a few points, I wanted just to raise questions. So for instance, when we discuss the nationally determined contribution, what do we mean by being nationally determined? Is that the government and a few ministry, or in the future, are we looking for the preparation of NDCs to really involve stakeholders, to have like consultation process at the domestic level, based on whatever domestic procedures there might be for this, but emphasizing that NDCs have to be prepared in a participatory manner. The same for adaptation communication. For the global stocktake, do we want to have a conversation that's just about parties and maybe the IPCC? Or do we think that every 5 years, this global stocktake being the most important ambition moment in the future should involve a much broader discussion involving stakeholders, channeling their inputs in advance of a global stocktake to make sure that there is a public mobilization for more climate action. That it's not just about governments realizing that they have not yet done enough and they need to do more, but about the public being really able to size again the importance of strengthening climate action. And so all of those points are critical and really need to be addressed in the next 2 weeks, and particularly this year also, to make sure that next year, when we are looking into finalizing the modalities for the Paris rulebook, we try to learn on other existing multilateral processes that are party-driven, that are intergovernmental, but that do not exclude formal opportunities for stakeholders, be they researchers, local governments, local communities, and indigenous people, to have their voice, expertise, perspectives, and expectations reflected in the process.
Thanks, Sebastien, and thanks for starting to highlight some of these concrete opportunities. And for those who are interested in some more opportunities, of course, you can talk to Sebastien afterwards and ask questions, but you can also consult some of the submissions made for this afternoon's workshop, and as well as the Secretariat's report, which summarizes a lot of these options and opportunities that at least we see for strengthening the role of non-party stakeholders. You also mentioned the transparency framework, and we'll go into that in a little bit more detail now with Yamida Danier from the World Resources Institute, who is also the manager of the PACT consortium that we talked about earlier. Yamida, you will introduce the PACT project in a bit more detail, but also present your latest reports that just came out. The floor is yours.
Yes, good morning, everyone, and thank you for taking some time to join us. So I'm Yamida Danier. I am a senior associate at the World Resources Institute, and I am leading the UNFCCC work there. And I had the privilege to work with a number of research institutes and NGO colleagues from around the world, from both developed and developing countries, in this project called PACT, Project for Advancing Climate Transparency. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more. It's really, this project is about So this project, as I said, is made of this consortium, is to facilitate the development of relevant and timely options for the design of the rulebook, mainly the transparency and accountability provisions of the rulebook. And it also provides some space to build consensus. We have done this kind of process before. Ahead of Paris, we've been leading a project called Act 2015 on the design of the Paris Agreement, and we're doing the same on the design, actually, of the Paris rulebook for its implementation. And it's going to rely upon, some research, robust research and analysis, but also providing space for regional convening, dinners among different stakeholders, to really raise awareness, increase capacity and understanding of areas of convergence, divergence, and identification of landing zones, on how we get the most coherent and robust, effective set of rules. I'm not going to insist into the importance, because you heard it from one negotiator itself. Without this, it could be an empty shell. The Paris Agreement could result in an empty shell, and we need to make sure that we do have some things that really get us closer to meet the objective of the Paris Agreement. This is just an overview, and you've seen already the logos before, so I will go quickly, but, it's really, we don't do that alone. And I think that notion, we don't have the luxury actually to meet, to fulfill the ambition of this Paris Agreement. We have little time to do that. We don't have the luxury, to just decide whether it's just governments, doing it alone, or, stakeholders. And it's not just, one institution that can lead such a project. We learned that to do that effectively, it will take all of us. And this is just, an overview of what we're going to be doing in the next, year and a half. We are going to release our first paper. Actually, it's online on the mapping, and I'm going to give you a preview of the main key finding of this particular research. It's an example of how actually it's going to support the negotiations. But we're going to produce a series, actually, of research papers on the different building blocks of, the Paris rulebook. So after this one, which is very cross-cutting, trying to mapping out the linkages between the transparency provisions and all the other provisions of the Paris Agreement, we will have, a paper on reporting, on the review, on the compliance mechanism, hopefully also on the global stocktake, because capacity building has been, it has been mentioned before, is such an important conditions, to provide a constructive environment for the negotiations, but also to sustain its implementation. We're also going to produce a paper based on the regional analysis that we will be doing and the different perspective within our own consortium on how to do that more effectively. I think the flagship really will be, to come back 6 months ahead the conclusion of the rulebook. So in May 2018, with a kind of representation of what this rulebook could look like, with some some recommendations as to how it could be framed. It may not be a totally good text, but definitely trying to framing and to give a sense of how it could look like, because we know how complex it is. So what I'm going to do is give you navigating through, one of the papers that we have just released, and I do have one of my co-author, with me, Melissa, and we do have also members of our consortium in the room. I see ODI. We have Sam from PACT here, who have been definitely reviewing, this paper as well. So it goes through a very intensive, research peer review process. And this is about mapping the linkages between the transparency framework and other provisions of the Paris Agreement. You heard, those of you who have been here since yesterday, that figuring out those linkages are going to be a very important point of discussions, because this is so complex. It's been highlighted by negotiators in the plenaries being a potential source of bottlenecks. So what we've been doing is to try to facilitate, again, that understanding, to see how we're going to get a coherent design. So yes, and I will go very quickly into this, the why. I think in a nutshell, there's little time getting a good snapshot landscape of what we have to do and how we can, and how we don't start from scratch. I think, we mentioned earlier that, the Marrakesh Accord, it took 5 years after the Kyoto Protocol to get, its rule book. We don't have the same amount of time, and we need to make sure that we don't start from scratch. There's 20 years of experience that we need to build upon. But the experience shows us that identifying clearly those linkages so that we don't end up with a rule book that is overburdensome. We avoid the overlap and make sure that actually we get a good coordination between the different experts. Transparency, for example, or the global stocktake are mechanisms, systems that are very cross-cutting, really benefit from this understanding. And I think I will stop here. This is actually the kind of main output of our paper. It's an overview of what, this rulebook is, the linkages between, the rulebook. And we made the conscious decisions that we're going to place transparency at its center because of its cross-cutting nature. And we know that without transparency, it's going to be very difficult to build any sort of trust among countries as to whether countries are really doing their best and what efforts are being made to fulfill with their agreements. So transparency being at the center, and it was highlighted before, you do have three main components: the reporting requirements on actions and supports, and also a two-phased process on the review. So there would be a technical expert review and then a multilateral assessment. And as you could see on the left, on my left hand side, you would have it just highlight all those provisions that are included in the Paris Agreement that needs to be taken into account when designing this particular those reporting or review guidelines, especially on the reporting side. Why? Because the scope of the report that needs to be produced by the transparency framework includes the mitigation outcomes, the inventory, so the historical trends of greenhouse gas emissions, and also the support provided, mobilized, and also received by countries. And those particular issues are mentioned in other provisions of the Paris Agreement. So, there's a lot of reference of what it would take to even do a good inventory, the IPCC methodology, but also, when it comes to monitor progress made to fulfill the NDCs, which is one of the information to be included in the reports. We need to figure out for those countries using planning to use market mechanisms how this is going to be taken into account to avoid double counting and preserve environmental integrity. In addition, we know that we do have separate kind of negotiating tracks, but they are very linked. This is a case for the NDC. What information do you need to report when communicating your NDCs? And then how much of that is going to be reported every 2 years to make sure that, you are implementing, to inform how you're implementing, those NDCs. So there needs to be coherence, on those two, and those experts involved in both processes might need to be at the same table at some point. And the same on financial supports. There's a substat track actually on the accounting of support to be mobilized, and that also needs to be taken into account when figuring out what needs to be reported regularly. Technology transfer, it's the same. Capacity building, this is a big issue. In the agreement, we do make reference to two kind of bodies that have been created in Paris. One that is dedicated to transparency, which is a CBIT, Capacity Building for the Initiative on Transparency, led by the GEF, and also the Paris Committee on Capacity Building, and how they do what they do, and how it helps countries to report about their progress is going to be important. And then, that informed the reporting guidelines. What is being reported is likely to be reviewed. Actually, the text has a bit of ambiguity, and that needs to be clarified, but there's going to be a focus on the mitigation elements of the efforts and the support provided or received. And there are provisions that are mandatory in the transparency framework, and some that are of a more voluntary nature. And this is why, in these also slides, it gives you a sense of what is mandatory, what is mandatory, like the inventory information or information to track progress on your NDCs, versus the adaptation information that is on a more voluntary nature. And then the multilateral assessment is going to definitely focus on progress towards NDCs and support provided. And the Paris Agreement made clear reference between the link on the link between the transparency framework and the global stocktake, because the information from this transparency framework on actions, implemented action and support also provided, will inform the global stocktake. And we know from the global stocktake that the outcome of this exercise is going to inform the next round of NDCs. And based on what you're going to communicate as your next round of NDCs, is going to inform what you're going to put on your report afterwards to inform of efforts and progress made in implementation. And there's no explicit reference in the Paris Agreement on the link between the transparency and compliance, but the experience, especially with the Kyoto Protocol and experience with all the multilateral regimes, know that the review mechanism plays a critical role in identifying where there are gaps. And then it provides a useful input if you do have a compliance a mechanism to promote facilitation, to enhance facilitation and promote compliance, on how this can be done in a more efficient way. So this is why we also indicated that. And I'm going to go a little bit more in detail, because there's been already many references into those two particular mechanisms for enhancing the accountability, but also ratchet up ambition, which is very important. And without getting into the details, and you will digest it, more at your leisure with the report, it's you can see that the Article 13, the output generated, which would be both the national reports every 2 years, and some of the more comprehensive reports, every 4 years eventually, can be also complemented by some sort of synthesis of those reports that the Secretariat could do. This is something that parties will need to decide. And also what it's going to generate is the reports of the review that would take place as well. And all of that can be used to assess progress. It can provide useful information to help the Secretariat to aggregate all those individual efforts. And as it's become, more robust and accurate over time, this assessment is going to be also much stronger and more accurate over time. And also so I just highlighted that, the potential outcome also of the, those linkages. And conscious of time, I will go quicker on the compliance. I think this was an issue that is a bit sensitive that, we were keen to explore, because we want to demystify and to make it clear that the review process of the transparency is different. It has a purpose than the compliance mechanism. But then when it comes to making sure that there's no free riding, there's different ways this could work based on the experience that we do have. If a country fails to fulfill with its reporting requirements, and this is discovered, after a review, that can be highlighted or that can trigger consideration by this mechanism under Article 15. Or, there could be, if a party think that they may not, they don't have the facility actually to fulfill such a requirement, for those that are mandatory, they can already highlight ex ante in advance that they are struggling. Or, we could also, for those issues that are often those requirements that are more voluntary in their nature, there could be a more facilitation process put in place, to help, countries to get that information in their reports. So this is just to give you a snapshot. I am happy afterwards to go more into details. And the full report is going to be available at least by, Friday this week. We do have an executive summary that is ready. But yes, I will be around, and we would be happy to answer to your questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Shamida. And actually, I found the report online this morning already, so
yes, the report is definitely online, so you can get access. If you put, PACT mapping, the title, you will definitely see that. And again, we will have some printed copy later.
Right, then we move on next to Samoa from the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance, who is also part of the PACT consortium, and who can provide some insights into the role of PACT. Thank you. Into the role of PACT in the PACT consortium, but also of the role of non-state actors, also in capacity building on the ground in Africa. Sam, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Arno. Good afternoon, everyone. I will start from where Yamide stopped, because we are part of the PACT consortium. And I will start with the question, why transparency? For who and by who? We're talking about in terms of when you're looking at it from the African perspective. Why are we keen on this issue? Why are we keen into this project? Why are we doing this research and other engagement under the project for advancing transparency? So until we begin to unpack the question of transparency by who and for who, then we'll be able to appreciate more why Africa find itself in this, and also PACT in this consortium. Why transparency matters for us in Africa, and then also the Paris rulebook. One is because over the years, accounting guidance and also parties reporting and complying with the conventions over the years been marred with double counting and mistrust, especially when you're talking about who is providing what and who is receiving what. We have various reports coming out from NS1 countries saying support has been provided to developing countries and especially Africa. Meanwhile, you hardly see such coming. And where it comes, how do African countries themselves utilize that? How are we able to verify? How are we complying with all those instruments and commitments we've committed ourselves to do and to deliver? So that is one of the reasons to avoid the double counting that we see, especially in support, talk of finance, capacity building, technology transfer, and the likes. So we've seen series of double countings, which has led to a lot of mistrust between developing countries and developed countries. Why transparency matters to us again, and why are we in this project? Because the transparency and the Paris rulebook will enhance a framework that is recognize the special circumstances of the least developed countries as seats. And most of these countries are also found in Africa. Thirdly, is because the Africa NDCs if you look at the INDCs that were submitted from Africa, which is now the NDCs, are pegged on conditionalities. Some are unconditional, that is the domestic effort that African countries says they are going to make without international support. But the conditional aspect also says we cannot be able to implement our NDCs and also effectively implement the Paris Agreement without support. So this international support then comes in handy because it's also provided for in the Paris Agreement that a developed country will have to provide support, especially to developing countries. So then that informs also our interest in seeing that transparency is also enhanced of what is being provided in terms of this international support that are being anchored in the developed countries' NDCs, and what is being received, and also how it's being utilized. And also not looking only at the international aspect, but even domestically, the commitment that the African countries have made that we're going to deliver on this domestically. How far have we gone with that implementation? If there is no effective transparency in place for us to have modalities, procedures, and guidelines right from the Paris rulebook that will also guide us in domestic implementation of our NDCs. Then we also interested in this project, and we're part of it because it's spur also national and international actions by our government from Africa. Once they know that, okay, there are these processes that are in place, and then people are watching, and then we need to deliver on this, we need to report, we need to account, it will be verified, it will be measured. Then it will spur them to action and ensure accountability and transparency in the whole process in the delivery of their NDCs as well as the implementation of the Paris Agreement. So based on all this, you will see that two things that are cross-cutting in what I've said is the issue of our NDCs that will require international support. Now, from the experience Yami, they have talked about, we're building on the accounting guidance that were there in the previous agreements and conventions. Like if you look at most of our NDCs, most African countries, they used the IPCC revised 2016 guidelines. And so different modalities, different calibrations were provided in developing countries' NDCs. So then if we have to be on the same page, the issue here then is the international support upon which we are going to implement the INDCs. How are we going to ensure that it is received and is being accounted for? Right now, in some of the countries in Africa, like Kenya, they are developing climate finance coding with the support of UNDP to track the climate finances that are coming into the country. But the question is, and also as civil society, now we're going to be working, we're also developing a climate tracking finance tool that will be used across our member states in Africa. Then once this money comes in, is it really a climate finance? Is it used for what it's meant for? Or is there budget movement from, okay, we'll move this money, though is a climate change adaptation project, is the money coming in for mitigation, is for capacity building, is for technology transfer, but we have security issue, we need to move that. Who is going to put an eye on that this money is well utilized for what it's meant for? Who raised the red flag? And secondly, are there policies, when the flag are raised, are there policies in place to check, to put measures in place to say, okay, look, this flag has been raised, this money has been moved, it is not how it's supposed to be done at the domestic level to enhance check and balances and ensure that there is effective delivery of the implementation of our commitment under the Paris Agreement and helping us to achieve our NDCs. PACT at the before Paris developed a handbook on INDCs, which helped some of our African governments to package their NDCs together, INDCs then together. And so the work does not stop there. We see that, okay, now that NDCs are in place, we've had the handbook that have helped you, assisted you to develop this, and also work closely with the African group of negotiators on all these issues as they negotiate on various fronts regarding this issue. Now, when we move to implementation, how then do we ensure transparency? And that is why this consortium is key to us, that we are not stopping at helping the negotiators and the government put in place their NDC's contributions, but we're also following through to see that it is well implemented, there is transparency, there is accountability, the measurements are there, and everybody is doing what is supposed to do. So these are some of the issues why we find ourselves in this consortium, and we believe that the Paris rulebook is key to effective delivery and implementation of NDCs in Africa. And if we talk about this transparency issue, then it raises several questions of what has been created over the years. One of our components of our strategic plan 2016 to 2020 is holding government accountable. And this we doing through research, which make this project, PACT project, handy to help our government and negotiators to package whatsoever is needed for them to deliver effectively, both at the international level, their commitment, and then domestic commitment they have made. We're also building the capacity of civil society across Africa to help track some of these processes, putting in place monitoring and tracking tools and compliance scorecard. And this is the way we want to see that these things is done at the international level in line with the Paris book, provided guidance by the Paris book, because we know so many things are still loose, and then we have to have a crucial role to play in the design of the Paris book because it affects us, both at the international level and domestically. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam. And thanks also for illustrating how PACT is already playing a role, both in supporting governments, but also monitoring what they're doing. There were several references made already today by Achala, by Amid, to capacity building and the importance thereof. And I guess our next speaker, Monica Echegoyen, will also be talking about that in a little bit more detail. So Monica is the coordinator for the Initiative for Climate Action Transparency, or ICAT. So she can explain a little bit what ICAT is doing and how that relates to developing the rulebook.
Thank you very much. And first of all, thank you for all your attention. I think that we need to stretch a little bit because we're getting like hungry and tired, and this is just the beginning of 2 weeks. So thank you very much. It has been very, very enlightening to me, all these important reflections. And I just want to take you back to a broader aspect of the non-state actors in engagement. We have the opportunity now to build the bridges between key actors, the UNFCCC Secretariat and countries need to build the process and the tools to communicate with non-stakeholders actors. And I think that is very, very important for us because we are in the beginning of something and there is always an opportunity to create something good. So the Initiative for Climate Action Transparency that I am coordinated, I'm really, really new on that post. I came from the government of Mexico. I've been working with the government of Mexico for 13 years. So I still cannot feel myself not in the government field, but I'm now in the ICAT field. So this Initiative for Climate Action Transparency is about MRV. This initiative was created or its designed in 2014 before the Paris Agreement, and it was an MRV trust fund. And now, because of the Paris Agreement, we are this transparency action trust fund. It's a multi-donor trust fund. It was established firstly by the German government. Then we also have some funds from the Italian government. And also we have very important funds from CIF, from the Children Investment Fund Foundation, and from Climate Works Foundation. So it's a really nice mixture between governments, developed governments, and also international organizations that are working on climate change with non-state actors for a long time ago. So this ICAT, it's about developing tools and also capacity building in countries. So we are focused on the countries, on giving them tools to develop how to manage all these MRV and transparency issues. But one of our major aspects on where we are developing a tool, a document we call methodological guidance, is in how to engage national governments with non-stakeholders, with non-state actor stakeholders. So there is something that maybe it's from your interest, and I'm happy to give you our webpage, and also to give you personally, if you like, how is the status of this guidance. We have a period of time quite long. We are hoping to end all our materials, all our tools in 2018, but we're working also with countries. Something very important for me to tell you is that ICAT is working with agencies and institutions, and we have here WRI, and we have here also UNEP DTU, and we are working with Verified Carbon Standard also. So we're working with those organizations that has that the technical experience, but also we are working with countries. So this ICAT is working in a country-driven process. Go into the countries and ask them, what do you need for enhance your MRV tools, and what do you need to comply with the transparency framework of the Paris Agreement? So I think that really we need to focus or give more efforts in how to linkage all these initiatives and partnerships and projects that are around the process, in order to create some good bridges between non-state actors and governments and all these agencies. And now the UNFCCC Secretariat has announced that they want to have a major role in being a facilitator for implementation in countries. So I think that we're in a very, very good moment to create something good, to create something solid, and to strengthen the communication between us. I don't want to get into details of transparency, because I think that we have covered that, and I know that we are a little bit short of time, and we want to hear the audience. So thank you very much, and I will be pleased to talk to you in more details about ICAT.
All right. Thanks, Monica, and thanks for keeping it brief as well. Then finally, and then before we open the floor, we are grateful for Dimitris Sevkulis from the EC, from the European Commission, DG Klima, coming here. And as I was mentioning in the beginning, at least there were a number of parties that made submissions about non-party stakeholders for the workshop this afternoon, and the EC or the EU is one of those parties. But maybe you want to more broadly reflect on some of the presentations and the thoughts that you heard today so far. Dimitris.
Well, thank you for giving me the courage to be the last speaker, and essentially, to repeat many of the things that we have heard already, and essentially standing between the lands and you. But really, actually, I'm here also because we are one of the major contributors to the PACT project, and I'm instructed to tell you why we put money in this project. So it is important for us to have a good transparency, a robust transparency scheme, a robust and effective transparency scheme, and clear rules for Paris. And that's why we feel that we need intellectual work. We need a lot of discussion to happen, and the negotiating rounds are there to help to do that, but we need to do that also outside the negotiating rooms. We need to have regional workshops. We need to have practitioners and scientists really to write, to produce good documentation that we can use in order to advance these rules. And that's why we came up with all these proposals to finance such activities, and Yamid explained quite well what this project can do about this. So this is a key ask for the EU, and that's why we are putting our money there, essentially. Now, when it comes to our positions, maybe I will start from our positioning when it comes to the transparency framework, and I will say a few words for non-party stakeholder engagement, even though that I was not, I wasn't sure whether you need this kind of input from our side at this stage. But for us, of course, the transparency framework is a key element of the Paris Agreement, and we all agree on that. And why? Because we work for the convention, we support the convention, and we need good info in order to understand how we are progressing with the implementation of our NDCs, and how we can support the global stocktake that we have designed. Now, there are certain things there are certain elements that we have seen in the Paris Agreement, and one of them is, for example, the flexibility that is being provided to developing countries that need it in the light of their different circumstances. And this is something that we all agree that flexibility should recognize the different capacities of the parties, but at the same time we should consider that this should not be the way to cement a certain status when it comes to this flexibility. So, because parties have dynamic capacities, they change, and they need to change in order to advance their action. So this is a particular issue that is very important for the EU. Of course, we need balanced coverage. We need balanced coverage of all the areas of our action, of mitigation, of adaptation and support. So that's quite critical for the EU as well. And we need to address all these areas in an appropriate manner. And this is exactly what we're discussing essentially in the negotiating rooms. And of course, the input of everybody is very important in that. Now, let's come to the non-state actors. You said that before. The non-state actors are the watchdogs of transparency, the watchdogs of ambition. And I will speak as a practitioner, actually, because we all have real jobs outside these sessions. So we are doing something, we're doing projects, we're doing activities in our countries or in other countries. And myself, I'm working very much with countries outside the European Union. I'm working in the international relations, and I'm following activities all over the world. And I was doing that for many years. So what I saw as a practitioner is that essentially the information that I was getting from all these NGOs, all these institutions, research institutes or other institutions, that they were coming to my door and they were offering a certain research study or a certain report, has been critical for my work. When it comes, for example, I was doing negotiations at the OECD for the export credit. So you remember a couple of years ago, it was a big issue for when it comes to the coal, about the coal power plants. And there was plenty of information that was coming, not only from the OECD, from the colleagues in that institution, but also from outside. From I don't need to name certain NGOs, but all this information was very, very useful for us in order to advance our negotiating positions and come with a very good outcome, in my opinion. Maybe it was not at the height of certain expectations, but in a multilateral process, it cannot be ideal ever. We know that. So that is very important. And what I also like is the different level of granularity that you have in the input that comes from all these institutions and civil society organizations. And this is the beauty of the whole thing, that the non-party stakeholders, they don't have to follow certain rules. They just have to say the truth, whether the truth is it covers a certain area, a certain location, or it is at the country level, or it is at the regional level, or it is at a very particular sector. This is the beauty of it, that the different granularity helps us to really get to get the information that we need for that particular moment. So I would say that we need, not only we need the non-party stakeholders to give us this information, but we should avoid enforcing, let's say, certain rules for non-party stakeholders on how they provide this information. We just need whatever information is out there, and we can all use it for the best, in the best way, in order to come with the outcome that we need. So I'm really eager to hear your interventions, because I feel that we had 6 monologues here, and that's not the real spirit of transparency at the end. Thank you.
A very good point. Thank you, Dimitris. And indeed, for having said that, we now move on to your comments, questions, and so on. As usual, briefly state who you are, affiliation, and just keep it to the point, or as much to the point as you can do. Any comments, questions? I'm sure there must be. Who's going to go first there? Right.
I'm injured. Lawsuit. Hi, my name's Una Fitzgerald, and I'm with the Center for International Governance Innovation. Thanks for a very interesting panel. One of the questions I had is, are people thinking about developing a platform where all these different inputs that Demetrius talked about, how you can have it at different levels, where you try to create some sort of coherent platform that people can see and understand what's going on, especially when you talk about things like the the financial side of it, being able to ensure there's no double counting, ensure that the money is going where it's expected and that the results are happening. Is anyone looking at it from a technical point of view? Because one thing I'm particularly interested in is blockchain, if anyone's thinking about using that for trust and transparency. Thank you.
Okay. And could you maybe indicate who is it addressed to the whole panel or one?
Anyone who has.
Anyone who wants
Sorry
to
about
take it, right? And then I think we had a question over here as well.
Which one?
Over here. No,
You're going to get hit on the back of the head if you're not careful.
What is the mic? Hi, I'm Marja Olf. I'm Coordinator Europe of the Sean Babaji missions. I have a question to you, Monica. First, I also wanted to express a feeling. We are an NGO. We do projects all over the world. So I'm sitting here out of loyalty with the 800 million women in India who wear a sari. I have also sari. And I realize in our eco-village, we work with the poorest of the poor. And sitting here, looking at all your bright information, I have two questions. Number one, how do we bring this awareness to the global normal population, let's say the people who need it most? And number two, I heard you work mostly with countries. Do you also work directly with civil society organizations when it comes to funding?
You can pass it on.
Who wants it?
Over here.
I give it.
Thank you. I'm not so a sports person, so thank you very
Can you
much.
keep it close to your. It's a mic, so keep it close.
Okay. So thank you for this very. Where is the mic?
Yes.
Is it here? Okay, I thought it was a nice chocolate box, so I wanted to keep it. Anyway, so this is very important for us, non-state actors from the developing countries, especially Africa. We need accountability and transparency, not only from the international level. The thing is about implementation on the ground. And if our governments are not transparent and accountable with whatever they are having now, or whatever little resources they will be having in the future, it will still not help the great majority of the people who are at the front line of the effects of climate change. This question is addressed to anybody. Do you see a possibility in the rule book for recipients of climate finance, that is developing countries, who will be receiving capacity building, technology transfer, and probably finances in the rule book? Then secondly, we've seen some signs in the African Renewable Energy Initiative, which are a little bit worrying for the African countries, especially the civil society. When it comes from action from donor countries, it is more worrying. Is there a possibility of having rules that bind even the donor countries on being transparent and not having self-interest or declare their interest before financing certain aspects, especially on the African continent? Those are some of the things that if we don't address them now, we'll find ourselves in the next 10 years talking about the same things. And then the climate change will still be affecting our people. So how transparent will all these issues be? And how can we contribute? Is there a whistleblowing mechanism in the UNFCCC where we can say, this is happening? Because that is a mighty country, or maybe a major donor country. People are afraid to talk about it. And then can we, as non-state stakeholders, have the opportunity to bring it at the highest level. Thank you very much.
Any further questions? In the back.
Thanks. Lucas Hermele from the Bogota Institute. I was maybe asking Yamid and Seb whether you have been looking into the possibility to include the role of subnational actors, the successes of subnational actors in the respective national communications, for example, starting with the industrialized countries that have to prepare their national communication, I think, in 2018. So whether that could be a pilot maybe to include or bring together these very different arenas. Also maybe to look into the impact of transnational governance initiatives, which are sometimes very hard to track. And if you had that into the, broken down into the national components, that would be maybe a way also to get some transparency on on what these initiatives, transnational initiatives that have been hyped so much and have been highlighted as the key to closing the gap, whether that they can actually deliver.
Thank you. If there are no more questions for now, we'll probably have time for a second round. But I want to start with Monica. There were two questions, I think, that were addressed to you that you can address.
Yeah, thank you very much. Regarding the platform, the sharing platform, or that any kind of platform that can engage all these kind of initiatives and funds and all. Yes, there is CBIT, the Capacity Building Initiative for Transparency, that is funded by GEF, and it's a mandate of the Paris Agreement decisions. It's creating a platform, a knowledge platform, that it's intended to develop all this kind of information for countries and stakeholders that need to know about what is going around on transparency, who is developing tools, who is developing projects, all that. And also, I can address you to Miriam Inostroza is here from UNEP DTU. They are developing that knowledge platform. So if you want to have more information about that, is that. ICAT also is developing knowledge. We don't want to call it now platform because there's going to be one platform, but like a knowledge sharing program where we can develop more peer-to-peer exchange of information of what we're doing in respect of transparency. And in respect of how ICAT is working with civil society, not directly funding civil society projects, but we're working with countries and with national governments, and they are engaging their civil society. And also all our tools and documents that we're going to release are also consulted by civil society and international organizations. Thank you.
All right. Sebastian, do you want to take the last question?
So maybe just very briefly on the last question, I won't have all the answers, but the national communication, just to remind to everyone, countries are supposed to report more regularly on their emissions, and then every 4 years for Annex 1 countries, and with an undefined schedule for non-Annex 1 countries, countries have to put forward national communications that are of different nature because they are a lot more narrative, qualitative. It's generally a 300-page long document that really explains how the country does things domestically. So the nature is different, not just a table of figures. And what is included in it is defined by a table of content that has been set by the process. And one interesting aspect of it is that these guidelines for the preparation of a national communication hasn't been really revised since the adoption back in the 90s already. So that's a good example, again, on how difficult it is to change the procedures, the guidelines once you have them adopted. There is no specific space there that calls for the recognition of local government explicitly, but there is a lot you could fit actually within the existing guidelines. So I think what would be very interesting, and that's what we are trying to do with other aspects, not just local government action, but also, for instance, how sustainable development and social development is integrated in climate action. The national communications are a great opportunity generally to try to look beyond just the guidelines and integrate in the report a more, let's say, an updated vision of what domestic climate action is about, not just based on the understanding of what was important in the 1990s, but really on what is making a difference right now when we try to promote climate action in relation to other actors like local governments and also in relation to other principles that are very important. So that's a great opportunity. And just to finalize on this, the role of national communication is also a little bit of a question now, because we have this new enhanced transparency framework. We have this these national communications that come on a 4 years time frame. And we know the global stocktake has a 5 years time frame. So it's a good opportunity maybe also to think whether those narrative reports that provide a deeper story of what is happening at the country level could actually play a slightly different role in the future.
So Sam is saving his firepower for the final round. So Yamida, you want to address the comment on transparency of climate finance?
Yes, I will try. There were a number of questions I will try to address. I would say I would just start by highlighting some opportunities in the design of the transparency framework to enhance the role of non-state actors. I think in the reporting, we could, if we could have some push and support for, making sure that countries report, regularly on how they've been conducting some consultation on the implementation or design of their NDCs, that could be already a step. Having been a reviewer of national communication myself, I remember there's time when the reviewers asked countries whether they could organize a session with non-state actors, and we do use that time to check what type of engagement was undertaking. And I think trying to support, to encourage such engagement through the reporting could help, because it would be made, held accountable for, communicating progress on such engagement. The other is on the review itself. There's a roster of experts. I think that many of you may not know that the expert undertaking the review of the reports are nominated for a roster of experts, and each country can nominate a number of experts. And what we see actually in the current regime is that we don't have enough experts to undertake the review. There's a lack of availability, so we need the governments actually to nominate more experts, and not all experts will come from staff from governments themselves. They can nominate experts from civil society, from research institutions, and I think that information alone, needs to be embraced, because it can go a long way if, there's some enforcement of governments, the UNF, the policy focal point, to nominate a more diverse range of, stakeholders to participate to that. Because this is, as a former reviewer, it's a great opportunity to build also capacity. You learn so much when you go into a country, you learn what they're doing, and you exchange also on how you can do things. So this is really an empowering tool that, I would like, you to consider. And then during this bond session, you do have two processes, the multilateral assessment and the facilitative sharing of views. This is, the kind of second phase of the multilateral view. And even if, countries have the opportunity to send questions. At the moment, the current system is designed more for countries to do that. But we could really also empower civil society to send their questions. They know the countries, so the civil society. So let's say that next there's going to be India, there's going to be Morocco, Mauritania. If those civil society in those countries, they know what is going on, they want to have some clarity, they could also send questions. But do they know about this process? So I think yes, it's how far down the line this information is getting provided. And I agree, then the notion of safeguards is another issue. I think you need to take each issue almost specifically. There's going to be safeguards to be required for preventing double claiming on finance, double counting, especially in the context of, use of market mechanisms. And also, there was these questions, the very good questions about how to take into account the actions by subnational, so cities, states, or even business. And I think there needs to be a lot of effort. It's difficult to account for these kind of issues, and I would like actually you to point you to ICAT, because this initiative actually is developing guidance on how to assess the impacts of the actions from non-state actors, and can help countries when they do their national total to try to see, yes, from national inventory, for my assessment of my policies, how much is actually taking into account those other actions, so that it also provide opportunities to identify ways to enhance the NDCs. So I think, so I would, point you to that. I would say that the issue of access to, and he's going to really illustrate that, but from the heart, the access of information, it's also down to a little bit of scale of funding. We go with PACT, we've been able to organize some regional meetings on difficult, complex issues of the negotiations. And thanks to them, because they are very much rooted into, they have connection with grassroots also, not just negotiators, not just the big names of the NGOs. I was able to be in the room with pastoralists, with people that you don't see here in Bonn, which was really refreshing. And that's the beauty of collaborating, not with the usual name, but also with organization like PACT. But it's down to finding those, because there's so much you can do. So if I needed to rely on them to make sure, with the little amount of support that we had, it could get those delegates into the room. So based on the scale of funding that we have, we can get more into the room. But so I just wanted to highlight those. And tomorrow there's going to be the Durban platform. We're going to discuss exactly what you have been raising about how to enhance the contribution of non-state actors. The OGP is the Open Government Partnership. This is also a platform where that support the co-design of solutions between governments and civil societies. There's going to be a meeting on Sunday on this. I encourage you to look at this. There's a summit every year, and last year I went. There's this notion of data revolutions. There's so many amazing things that local people, and it's really connecting to the people a little bit more than what we're doing here. And I think those platforms are just complementary. It's going to be very difficult to find one coherent platform where you can find everything, but I think UNFCCC can do a good job in already, providing that space for these kind of side events to download on what we're doing, what is being done. But actually, it's very difficult to do everything and to coordinate. But we're trying to get there, and maybe the PCCB, those organizations, those new bodies on capacity building could try to also do that.
Thanks, Shamida. Also, I have to say, unfortunately, it's now 1 minute to 1, and there will be another side event at 1:15, which means that very soon people will start coming in and asking us to leave. But I'm sure also a lot of you will be ready for lunch. Just a few final comments. So as I said already, I think it's very, very important for as many of you to also come to the in-session workshop at 3 p.m. this afternoon, which will be in the Chamber Hall. But also we'll upload several documents and papers, including, of course, the report by PACT, but also some of the other relevant papers for this event on the side event website of the UNFCCC. And then finally, of course, let me extend a warm welcome to all the speakers from both parties and non-party stakeholders for coming to share their views, and also thanks for your participation. Thanks. Sorry, Sam. Sorry. Yeah, exactly. Good. Yes. Anyway, but as I said, what I'll do is I'll send you an email, also to put you in touch. But generally, curious to know what you're doing as well in the work with PACT, because for me that also sounds very relevant.
Yeah,
Some of the work that I've been doing. So,
We're working in 45 countries in Africa. So it's such a huge.
You're coordinating it all.
Yes. So it's such a huge one.
Yeah, very nice.
Thank you.
Thank you. So last
So as the non-state actors, then benefit from that because we need to empower the people. Once the resources are limited, then we also have a huge challenge because, okay, like us, 45 countries in Africa. So you can imagine the volume of resources we require to do the work.